Hello and welcome. Today I get to interview a dear friend of mine, Liz Birkeland. She is a covenant coach and just a wonderful, sweet woman who loves the Lord so much. And she's here today to talk about some amazing ways that the Lord has shown up in her life. And so, hey, Liz, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Amanda. This is such a treat, and I'm so excited to get to spend some time with you, and we get to talk about one of our favorite topics, God.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
yep.
For sure. All right. Well, tell my viewers and listeners just a little bit about yourself. Give us the summary of you.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I'm Liz Birkeland, and I have been married with my husband Pete for over 30 years now. We are the proud parents of two sons. One will be 28 next month in August. And then our baby, our 22-year-old, just turned 22 yesterday. So we've got the two sons, and a lot happened in order to get those two boys. So it's always been fun. But I think about our sons, and if we think about what good men they are, it starts with them as babies, because they were always such happy babies. And it was like, such a joy to raise them, even though, we've all got the challenges with our kids and, everything. But I would say absolutely the two sons, and seeing what kind of men they're turning out to be is the highlight. Um, I am a Gold Star daughter, which means my father was killed in Vietnam when I was 5 years old, and my mother raised me and my younger sister by herself. She never remarried. And I think I mentioned to you, that's the way it always was for us. We were always the girls whose dad was killed in Vietnam, but we didn't know any different, so that was it. Professionally, I went to college, worked for several years, went back to school for accounting, got my CPA license. So I've been a certified public accountant, quit working when our oldest son was born. Never went back to accounting full time. Had some jobs in aviation, in working for airlines in different roles, and just kind of enjoyed being a stay-at-home mom. And then I will say, when the pandemic hit, it was our youngest son's senior year. And so that entire school year, I'd been thinking about, it's the last homecoming, it's the last soccer game, it's the last, last of everything. And I was dreading what was going to happen, because all of a sudden we were going to be empty nesters, and I didn't really know what life looked like when I wasn't busy volunteering at school and going to his events and, just running the household. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden I lost my part-time job at the airline because nobody was flying anymore. He was home finishing school on his computer in the basement. There was no more of anything, and it felt like an implosion kind of for everybody. But it was really tied in with him and his senior year of high school, and what does it look like to parent when there's nobody to parent, and I'm sure there's a ton of other women who can totally relate with all this. But that June, I was catching up on some emails, and kept getting emails from the woman whose coaching academy you and I both went through. And she was talking with a couple of women about this life coaching gig. And, I had really no clue what a life coach was. I just knew, watching these women talk, that whatever it was they had, I wanted more of that. And I'll be perfectly honest and tell you, I've always been a Christian, but I didn't really know what that meant. And I think I shared with you too. I've always believed in God, but I didn't always believe him.
Mm-hmm.
And I got into this coaching academy, which was so faith-based and spirit-filled and biblical. And it was like, that's who God is. That's who he is. And so that was 3 years ago, and my life has done like a 180 pivot. And instead of just kind of going like this on an upward trajectory, June of 2020, it went like this and accelerated, so it's been totally cool, and all based because that's how I started getting to know God and getting a real relationship with who he is. And so that's a very long introduction. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. That's just kind of, again, the summary of kind of your background and all of that, which is awesome. And you said some things that were really awesome, like that I thought were super interesting, like how like you always believed in God, but you didn't always believe him. I think that's such a thing that so many, I think, Christians can resonate of like, yeah, we believe in God, but well, what does that actually look like? Like, what does faith actually look like, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Besides just going to church on Sundays, right? And
Exactly.
believing his promises and living it out so that our lives actually look different, right? People should be able to look at
Very
us and go like
much.
something's different.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Um, at the time, I did not really realize what an impact my father's death had on my faith life. I knew what it looked like in a day-to-day earthly realm. But when I look back, and I don't remember my parents exactly saying to me, Daddy will be home.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure there was that assurance that Daddy will come home. And then when he didn't, I know there was a part of that 5-year-old me who was like, I can't trust my parents.
Mm-hmm.
I can't trust what they say, even though it was well intentioned, that they did everything in their power. But you still get that sense that I can't trust.
Mm-hmm.
And to, as an adult, fast forward 50 years, and realize that must be how I was feeling about God. If I can't trust the parents who are here on this earth, who are called to protect me and raise me, how can I trust a God who I don't know, I can't see, I have no relationship with?
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole idea of learning more about him and understanding that God is who he says he is, and God does what he says he'll do.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where that shift came from.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, or fortunately, it's taken me that long,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And it's not like
Yeah.
he was never around.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I didn't put the pieces together. I didn't spend enough time, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so interesting. It reminds me of something that um, growing up in the church, people talked about this a lot, at least where I grew up, is the idea that how we see our earthly father is often transferred to how we see God.
Mm-hmm.
And like some, you can say parents, but a lot of times our fathers specifically, because God is referred to as a father. So how we see our earthly father and our relationship with him really can significantly impact, even more than our relationship with our mother, how we see God and how we relate to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's such an interesting, I think, kind of example of that.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I know part of it for me was we had a few men in our lives growing up, but it wasn't that consistent, supportive, protective father figure. And so I didn't really know what it honestly looks like. And I know in my 20s, I was almost desperate for a boyfriend. And I know part of that was this idea of just looking for something that I didn't really know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, to feel like nurtured and safe and
Mhm.
protected. Yeah,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. It's so interesting. I think that also brings up like that there is that innate desire, I think, as women, like that we have that desire to be protected, right? Like doesn't mean we can't do the things, but like there is that desire, like we want a man to, and we're designed to have a man in that role. And it's just, I think that shows that so beautifully too.
Mhm. Well, I know my husband Pete has, I love the feeling of his arms around me when I feel totally protected, or when he
Mhm.
does step out and do something that brings me under his care. But that idea that he was also drawn to me knowing that I didn't need him. He
Right.
enjoyed that independence and that strength that I had innately in me, and yet the need to have a relationship with him. So
Right.
I think it's honestly a beautiful way that we've been created.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That is, it's so beautiful. Like two healthy whole people, or people who are independent and can handle themselves, right? But that they choose to recognize that
Mhm.
there's pieces that they have weaknesses and we can fill each other's weaknesses. That is so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So looking back over your life, like how would you like now in retrospect seeing God show up, right? Like maybe as you've mentioned that, walking through life, especially as a child, there was that turning point of kind of a mistrust or a lack of trust
Mhm.
based on your experience of your parents, and um, through no fault of their own either, right?
Correct. Correct.
And
Yeah.
and but it created kind of this mistrust, and that kind of ended up extending to God that you now know. So, but looking back, right, when we're walking through hard seasons, even when we don't have that close, really intimate relationship with God, like we believe in him, but it's not intimate, we can still look back and see, oh my gosh, he was like so faithful through all of this. What are some of the things that you look back and see, like, wow, like, yeah, I believed in him, but I wasn't right, like on fire or like really close or intimate. But man, I can see how he really used that for, his glory, my good.
Mhm. Um, One instance that absolutely sticks it out in my mind that was concrete evidence that God was in my life. Um, our oldest son, Andrew, the one who's going to be 28, was born um, with severe medical issues, and we knew before he was born some of what we were up against. And to make a long story short, there were always doubts, not so much doubts from the medical community that he was going to live, but they weren't sure how he was going to thrive. And it was a lot. And he was 10 weeks old before we brought him home from the hospital. And at the time, I was a CPA, Pete was a CPA, and I quit work when we brought him home from the hospital because he just needed me to become a 24-hour nurse with all of the care and the doctor's appointments and sudden hospitalizations. And we never doubted that he was going to live. And like I said, Pete's faith has been rock solid. He was always like, nope, I knew he was going to be fine. Um, And so honestly, that is part of me getting to rely on my husband too, borrowing his faith when I didn't always have my own. But anyway, with Andrew, he was probably maybe 2.5, 2 years old. And we had turned the corner from just daily crisis management with him to getting through and realizing that this little boy was going to live. And I will just say he's far surpassed expectations. Physically, mentally, he's just a walking billboard for his medical condition, that there is hope. But I struggled with that a lot, like wondering, why did God do this to my baby? Why is he putting us through this? Why, you know, why do we have to go through all of this? And it was always a question, why? And I can clear as day, I wish I'd written the date down, clear as day, sitting on the sofa in our living room in front of the big picture window in the living room. And I sat on the couch and I was just lamenting and God, why are you doing this? And he was so gracious and sat down with me on the sofa and touched me and said, you don't need to know. I don't remember hearing it. I don't remember feeling him. And yet I knew that he was comforting me and assuring me and said, you don't need to know. And it was such a beautiful release that I could let go of all of that. And looking back, Andrew was maybe 2, so it's been 26 years. And I can look back at other instances in my life, in our lives, where God was so gracious to give me that answer that applied to so many things. You don't need to know when this will happen. You don't need to know what this looks like. You don't need to know why it's so tough right now. Just saying, let me have this. Let me take this. It's not yours. You don't need to know. And I will say that is the turning point for me as far as remembering and knowing and understanding what a good father is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think that idea of like, yeah, we don't have to know. I think sometimes, depending on the situations, the Lord sometimes will give us little glimmers of like part of the purpose, but sometimes not till much later.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, like having walked through my own like really
Mm-hmm.
hard season and, having a baby with medical complications who actually end up passing, like I had a similar thing that I walked through of like, why did this happen? And that a very similar, like, well, I don't know that I'm ever going to get that answer and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But that even in the months since, because it's only been 7 months, that the Lord has given me those like moments of like, hey, here's something beautiful that came out of it. Here's another thing that's really beautiful, right? Like my oldest daughter accepted the Lord. Like it's created this like really much more realness for my oldest child for sure, because she was aware. She's 4, so she's been aware.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's created these beautiful conversations where she's just, I think it's created an intimacy and a relationship with the Lord for her that, I mean, not that it wouldn't have happened, but it's in this really deep way, right? And things like that, just like seeing these beautiful moments, and that we're not going to get the full picture probably till we're in heaven of why we have to walk through trials, because that's what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another thing too is that for me was helpful was going like, well, God didn't do it. It's
Mm-hmm.
because it's just a consequence of living in a fallen world, right? Like, did he allow it? Yes, because we live in a world that there's sin and fallenness and it's not perfect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, like being able, like to surrender that and hold on to that, just that trust, like step into that trust and going like, okay, yeah, you know what? I don't have to know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, and I think that idea of hanging on to that trust and realizing that the faith is a decision, that you make
Mhm.
that decision. Um, we've been walking through an extended period of just struggle with my husband's business. And not that anything's ever been dire with it, it's just so unknown. And there are
Mhm.
disappointments, and it's a long period of time. And to understand that through it all, God is with us. And he's I wrote this on a sticky note on my stuck it on my fridge, and it pops up in my head when I'm exercising and you know doing a load of laundry. But from Isaiah 26:3, you will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you, whose thoughts are fixed on you. And it's like, what a lovely reminder that when we focus on him, we don't have to carry these burdens and
Mhm.
delays and heartache. Um, that's not meant for us.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And we
Not
can
that we're
walk in that.
exempt from it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Like peace is our birthright as believers, but we have to choose it.
Mhm.
Like we have to, it's right there for us to take and to step into, but we have to do the stepping into it. And I love that because I think so often, at least in like the circles I look at, like people really will celebrate for good reason, of course, like the really massive, like tangible physical ways that the Lord shows up. And I have several stories of that in my own life, right? Like ways that he's shown up. But like I think it's important to also talk about how he shows up in the waiting and in the like with your son's medical condition, like he's doing so much better than anybody expected, but he's not like fully healed.
Correct.
Right. He still has a medical condition. He still has whatever struggles and trials he walks through with that, but he's doing better than expectations. And so that's still a waiting even with that, right? Like and some of those waitings are like till heaven, right? Like that's the how we live in our lives. And I think that's actually even more of that strength and showing evidence of faith and God's faithfulness is like God doesn't come and rescue us from having to go through hard things.
Mhm.
Still have to go through the hard. But what he does do is he comes in and he takes the emotional burden of it.
And assures us that he is with us.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
We're not
Yeah.
alone.
Mhm.
That's
No,
awesome.
I remember for many years finding out about how my dad died in Vietnam, and I always drew such faith and strength and comfort that he wasn't alone, that there were troops with him when
Mhm.
he died. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized whether he was alone by himself, he wasn't alone because I knew Jesus was there.
Mhm.
And it's one of those almost like a V8 moment, like, well, duh, you know. Um, but there have been other instances in my life where it's only much more recent that I've realized I've never been alone. Jesus has always been with me in the super hard.
Mhm.
He never said we don't have to go there.
Right.
He just said you won't be alone.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Can you like talk about like what's another example of like one of those moments that were like really hard that maybe at the time felt really lonely, but as you look back, you can go like, oh my goodness, like no, Jesus was right there.
Mhm. Well, like even a simple missed car accident,
Mm.
you live in Southern California, so I don't know if you've ever been exposed to black ice, but I live in Minnesota, and in the winter, car exhaust can freeze on the road in what's called black ice. You don't see it. You can treat regular ice that falls and freezes on the ground, but the black ice is an entirely different thing. And one time driving to work, hitting black ice and spinning from the far right lane across the left lane over the median into oncoming traffic, spinning 180 into the far right lane, going the opposite direction and continuing to drive off. And at one point during that spin, looking up and seeing a truck coming at me.
Mm.
And somehow I drove off the other way.
Wow.
Didn't hit the car, ended up with a flat tire later in the day. But, you know, and it was like, that was a God thing.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't alone. There's no way I should have lived through that. So simple instances, but it's only in the last year, Amanda, that I have dealt with a very traumatic experience that happened to me when I was 24, and I had an abortion then.
Mm.
And that was something that I never dealt with. It was like, oh, that's over and done.
Mm.
And then over years and years, wondering why I'm depressed or angry or feeling unworthy. And so, like I said, it's only about a year ago that I started facing this obstacle that ended up being an obstacle that I didn't realize how it was affecting everything. But understanding that I wasn't alone in that either.
Mm-hmm.
Even though God let me make that choice to do that, He was always there with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding that God allows us to make bad choices, to do things of free will, that's part of why His love is so all encompassing and abundant, because we get to choose that too. He allows us to choose Him.
Yeah. That's so beautiful that, like, yeah, he allows us to choose him and he allows us the freedom to make bad choices.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, then he takes, like, when we surrender to him, he can take those and turn them into something beautiful. And that's even what he's done, because now you're stepping into ministry of helping other women heal too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I honestly, that was one of the things, like, I don't know, how can anything good come of this, God? And for Him to tell me, you need to go in and talk about this and help women heal, and realizing that even though I knew that the baby I aborted is a daughter, and understanding that while she's not here on earth to fulfill her purpose, she's fulfilling her purpose. I'm helping do that by talking about helping to heal women.
That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I imagine that in helping women, it brings another level of healing to you too, of being able to
Oh,
walk women through that.
mhm.
Yeah.
Giving them a sense of hope. And I always felt like I shouldn't be allowed to have this great life that I've got, because I did something so terrible. And at the time, I felt like I didn't have support, that it was my only option, and understanding that that's how millions and millions of women feel. But understanding too that God forgives that.
Mhm.
And how can we turn that to good.
Yeah.
Because he has a purpose for everything. This last year, especially, when I say I started working on healing from my abortion, has been such a huge growing year. So,
Yeah. And how have you seen that like showing up, that growth?
um, a lot more patience with family, or with how my coaching business is going, or there's been a lot of release of me feeling like I'm responsible for things that, when you look at them, I'm truly not responsible for them. But the whole idea of letting go of control, I think probably in being able to release burdens and control and overwhelm has opened up the ability to receive God's love.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of picture hanging on a rope, and you get to be the end of the rope, and it's like I got nothing left. And the only thing you can do is open your hands and release and see what there is, because you don't have anything left.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard sayings that you can't receive with clenched hands. You know,
Yeah.
have to have your hands open to receive. And in order to open your hands, you have to let go of something.
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
true. That's so beautiful. And I think too, as you're saying, like that release, like releasing and then being able to receive, it also reminded me of how like when we're like there's the control aspect, and then there's also when we're holding on to like if we haven't forgiven ourselves for our own mess ups, right? And if we're holding on to all of that, even against ourselves, we we can't see or receive all of the grace and the love and forgiveness that God has.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not only does God forgive me, do other people forgive me? Can I forgive myself?
Mhm. Yeah.
And
That's
that,
almost, I think, one of the more like most important pieces because we can't control whether other people will forgive us or not. We can be sorry and repentant and humble, obviously, but we
mhm,
can't control their response.
mhm,
We know God, that Jesus does and that God does,
mhm,
but the only piece in there we can control is our own response and our own
mhm.
and forgiving of ourselves and how that frees everything up. And it's also interesting because how we see ourselves is how other people tend to perceive us. And so even if someone's willing to forgive us, if we haven't forgiven ourselves, there's still going to be some weirdness because we can't let it go.
Correct. Um, and this ties into the whole idea of what what unforgiveness are you hanging on to toward other people?
Oh
And how much of a weight can that be?
yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And then the idea of learning from Jesus that you can't receive God's full measure for you if you're hanging on to unforgiveness of a burden of a wrong that someone else carried against you or committed against you. And the whole idea that as humans we tend to look at in the earthly realm, well, they wronged me, and it doesn't change the fact that somebody wronged you or that you did something wrong, how whichever way this is playing, it doesn't change that fact. It just changes what are you carrying around.
Right. And it's a release of control and stepping into trust as well, because it especially when we're holding on to unforgiveness against others, it's that sense of like, well, I need to get justice, or I need to be my own vindicator, right? Like if I let them off the hook, well, then they're going to get away with it when it was wrong, right? But it's not that. It's not letting them off the hook. It's actually just giving yourself freedom and peace and releasing and trusting, because God is our vindicator, and God does things in ways that we can't understand sometimes, right? But but
Yeah,
he it's not letting them off the hook in the sense of like they have their own stuff they're going to have to deal with. And if they don't repent, there's going to be consequences, whether it happens in this life or the next.
right. No,
Yeah.
yeah. No, there are times I sit and think, well, why did it take me this long to figure this out, or to start learning, or to, open myself up to this? And I was like, well, it did because it did. And, you know, thank goodness you're on this path now. And if by talking about all of these things can help somebody else
Mhm.
open their heart to Jesus sooner, I mean, what a gift,
Yeah,
you
for
know?
sure. Yeah. And I think having the willingness to open up, especially about like, healing from an abortion, and then working with women, because I think that there's so much shame that can surround that, especially in the church, especially women in the church who, if they were saved when they chose to have an abortion, right? And like went into it kind of knowing it's wrong, but did it anyway, or even had one and then became a believer. I can't say every church, but in my experience, a lot of churches really don't handle it well. They put a lot of shame and a lot of condemnation that Jesus doesn't put,
Right.
but but it can be hard to find that like compassionate place, because people get so like passionately against people having abortions, right? That they get so focused on the don't do it. It's like, okay, well, okay, it happened, right? Like, how do we now envelop these women with compassion and love, and show them Jesus?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think what
Yeah.
you're doing is really beautiful.
Well, we've just started, and we're excited to move forward with this ministry and to see where it goes. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so beautiful. Awesome. So, do you have anything else that you would like really would love to share about, this whole idea of like God's faithful provision and showing up, and his faithfulness?
Um, I mentioned at the beginning that I had a funny thing to share about my husband's faith. Um, I think you've met my husband before. He's a big guy. He's like 6'5", and I'm 5'4", and he's a big teddy bear of a guy, and he tends to be quiet. He's really quite thoughtful, um, quite intelligent, and you can just see things working behind the scenes. And we were married in the church, and but I was a pretty rote Christian. It was just, I was confirmed. I went to a Lutheran college, went to church on Sundays, and every once in a while I'd come home and I'd been shopping and I bought some new pillows for the living room, and like rearrange everything. And Pete would be like, "Oh yeah, the pillows look nice. Living room looks good, Liz. I think you're looking for Jesus." And a couple years later, I'd come home with a part-time job. I'd all excited about having this job, and I could get a discount and, be doing something fun and be like, "Oh, I think you're gonna be really good at that. You're gonna enjoy it. I think you're looking for Jesus." And this just kept going on for like 20 years. I think you're looking for Jesus. And finally, like I said, COVID hit and things just, it was like upside the head going, well, duh, Liz, I think you're looking for Jesus. And it was like, thank goodness, but his quiet, strong faith and belief was enough for me to fall against when I needed to, knowing I deep down knew that God was there, but I just didn't know him, you
Mhm.
know? And so
Yeah.
just that reminder, wanting to tell people, give yourself some grace and understand that all God wants is for you to come to him. He is there. It's not like he's going to give up and go, you had 17 chances. I'm done. You know,
Yeah.
he's sitting there just going, come to me, daughter, come to me, son.
Hmm.
I just want to love on you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
And when we think about our children, what it is we want for them, we want to be the best parents we can. What does that look like? We want to raise them. We want to support them. We want to care for them. We want to love them. We want to teach them. We want to discipline them. We want to guide them. And that's all God is asking for, too.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. And they, in return, as children, like they love us and they, they have their moments, but they listen, right? Like
Mhm.
they receive that, especially like as loving parents, obviously we mess up and, we're not perfect, but when we come at it from a place of love and grace and humility, they stay super receptive and open to that guidance and that training.
Mhm.
And like you were just saying, that's what God wants, right? Like God is the ultimate perfect parent if he doesn't mess up and he's there. And that we just can come to him like children and be open to that and receptive to that. And he'll just guide. And, the more open and receptive and you are, the less discipline's needed. Right. Just like
Yeah.
with our kids, right? Like I
Mhm.
think that's just such a beautiful picture. Because it goes in the other way too. Like you were talking about free will earlier, of like we can also harden our hearts against him, right? Like I know, but like, sometimes my kid can get stubborn and it's just like, I know that like nothing's going to get through to her till she calms down and chills, right? She's 4, so she'll like get into her like mode. She did it last night. Like,
Yep.
and so, sometimes you have to just kind of sit there. And that's what he does, right? He sits there while we're in our tantrum or our stubbornness. That's so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the now 22-year-old, we saw him earlier this week, and he came up behind me and gave me a little rub on the shoulders and gives me a hug around the neck, and then gives me a kiss on the back of the head. And this is my 22-year-old son, who's he's almost as tall as his dad, so everybody's got their chins on top of my head at my house. But yeah, this idea, and this is the same little boy who used to have tantrums and be taken out of a restaurant because he couldn't behave. I sat in the car more than once with this one, and then he's like so sweet, and he's like, love you, mom, and it's like, that's exactly how I think God wants us to be with him. Like, I just love you, God.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Awesome. So beautiful. All right. Well, I think that we're kind of wrapping up on time here. So is there any like last thing that you want to share before we wrap up?
um I will say, back to that story of God saying you don't need to know, and how
Mhm.
gracious it was. One of my friends, another mom at the hospital where my son was, um, she was instrumental in sharing her faith with me. And one of the verses that she shared that was her favorite and has become one of mine is from Romans 11:33.
Mhm.
Oh, what a wonderful God we have. How unsearchable are his judgments, and his ways past finding out. And it's kind of a conglomeration of a couple different versions, but I love that idea of just that he's beyond what we
Yeah.
can comprehend.
Yeah.
And how glorious is it? Yes. Yeah.
hmm That
So,
is, it's so glorious. And I think it gives us a fun hope while we're here on earth because it means that we're never going to figure it out. Like there's always going to be something to learn.
mhm. Yeah.
It's never going to get boring.
Yeah. No, I used to think, well, at least when I get to heaven, I'll understand why he did all of this. And then it was realizing it doesn't matter if I do or not. He told me I don't have to know, you
Yeah,
know?
that's beautiful.
Yeah. So
That's awesome.
there's a lot of release. Yeah.
Yeah.
Opening up to receive.
hmm Yeah. And just the peace and the joy that comes with that's amazing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. So how can people connect with you and get a hold of you if they're wanting to know more or, connect with you?
Yep. You can either reach me at lizbirkeland.com, or if you wanted to learn more about Grace Uncovered and healing for the abortion wounded heart, at Grace Uncovered 14 at gmail.com.
Okay.
So we can get more information to you.
Okay.
Um,
Awesome.
the two of us are covenant coaches, so trained in the same academy as Amanda, and yeah, we're just have a heart for healing
hmm
all the pain that silence and shame has brought. So yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And do you have a website as well, right? Liz?
Not for Grace Uncovered, but for Liz Birkeland.
Okay.
It's not up to date right now. So
Okay. Okay. So the best way to contact you is going to
email.
be via email. Okay.
Yes.
Liz at
Yeah.
Liz Birkeland. And I'll put the emails in the show notes too, so that it's easy to grab. So if anyone who is listening or watching wants to know more about either healing from abortion and getting some just really loving, compassionate, faith-based support in that, please reach out to Liz. Her other specialty in coaching is women's health and wellness, and she's just wonderful. And she also is trained as a general life coach as well. So if you felt like you resonated with her and that she had things that you just appreciated, reach out to her, connect with her, and she's a great support and person to have. So thank you, Liz, and I'll talk to you later.
Oh, thank you so much, Amanda. This has been delightful. I'm so happy I got to spend time with you.
Yay. All right. Bye.
Bye.